Buenos dias. I'm glad to be here this morning. I've heard many different words this morning around the changes that we're seeing coming down the industry. And life is all about change, right? The only constant that we can be guaranteed in life it will be changing. The reality is there are major technology advancements that you have seen this morning in our first speaker. And those technology advancements are always going to have a disruptive nature around the lives we live. We've looked at a lot of consumer or commercial advancements. What I want to talk to you this morning is about how cloud in this digital transformation, and specifically the context of how virtualization and the concept of everything as code has majorly changed the way we do management practices within IT. As we are in the business of managing IT service delivery, we have to ask ourselves, okay, as we were hearing earlier, how does the investment that we have made in ITIL change with the advancement of these new concepts around agility and velocity and transformation? And we're going to talk about that. I'm not going to just share with you the information. I'm going to demonstrate to you how Pink Elephant perceives and understands how these models will not go away, but how they change and how they adapt and how they integrate. Because many people have the pieces. I had a conversation yesterday where I was teaching a course around the same theme, and a gentleman said, I've been in this business for over 15 years, and I know about ITIL, I know about Lean, I know about Agile, I know about all of these things, Six Sigma, and I had different puzzles, and I was trying to find a way to connect these puzzles. But what I didn't have was the picture on the puzzle box. It's very difficult to build a puzzle without seeing the picture. That's my goal for you this morning, is to present you the overall high-level view of how this stuff all fits together. So I constantly get asked the question, so I'm just going to make sure this is moving here, which is not. There we go. All right, I'm doing something wrong, guys. It's not advancing. All right. Need the technology to work for me. All right. Off we go. Okay, there we go. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is different. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the language that we use around the office lunchroom and the water cooler has changed in the last few years. I'm going to explore that language change with you now. We're going to look at the fact that we need to see these things in the context of a value system. We have traditionally seen ITIL in a circle, and that's understandable because we're trying to imply the constant of continuous improvement. But what people have a struggle with when they look at this circle is to self-identify. Where do they fit within the overall model? And how do I look at that from the point of view of what Lean talks about as flow? How do I get fast flow, continuous flow? And as DevOps talks about, how do I go from requirements to value in the fastest way possible? So if we're going to look at how we accelerate service management, I want to take a different look at it. We're going to be looking at it as a value stream, which is a Lean concept again. And then we're going to see how does Lean, which is a methodology for improving any process in its agility, its velocity, and its quality, how does it apply and how can it apply to all IT practices? Because we'll be hearing a lot about the new mantra that is everyone's current favorite theme, better, faster, cheaper, better, faster, cheaper. Because the whole reason we're seeing this move towards speed is about the digital disruption that we're seeing in the industry. And then finally, we're going to talk about how does Agile fit in, because it's interesting. Project management in general, of course, has always been a core competency. But the reality is, how do we accelerate project management? And so what's happening in the industry is the Agile methodology, which started in software development, is quickly expanding outside of just development, but into project management, product management. In fact, you can use Agile methods for any planned work. So it's moving out of development into operations, into even the business, because there is no specific IT aspect about the concepts that Agile implies. Interesting But how do we fit it in? Because both ITIL and the project management methodologies that we know, they all talk about each other, but there's no picture that shows how they all connect. And then finally, we'll think about this DevOps movement. What is it? This is one of the challenges we have because it is a movement, not a framework. And its movement has grown over time to evolve into different competencies. Now it's a collection of things. And this is confusing for people because they often grab onto one specific thing and say, that's DevOps. Well, yes, but that's only part of the picture. So this is our conversation this morning. So let's begin. So the beginning of all of these models, all of these concepts, begin with the concept of value. We're in the business of providing value. We're service organizations. As service organizations, we live or die. We get paid for delivering value. If we can't deliver value, then of course our question is, what is our mandate? Traditionally, these frameworks have considered value on just one domain, and that is quality. If I can deliver you the best possible product that meets your feature requirements, well then, wonderful, mission complete. But, quality has come in two different flavors. We have the concept of this is what it is and you receive what you expect, but there's also the concept of non-functional requirements. So in ITIL, we talk about utility, what the thing does, but we also talk about warranty. In the software world, we talk about that as non-functional or functional, the feature, and non-functional, the warranty aspects. This is where risk and compliance and architecture, security requirements get also equally considered within your work breakdown structure and or your user stories. The interesting thing is when we don't have an agile or project management method integrated with service management, we will primarily focus on feature or functional requirements and not give adequate consideration to the non-functional aspects which are equally important for value. Now that's all fine and good. We've always had those with the ITIL and the various models out there, but what is now also important and what Lean has given us, because what you're seeing is the 3 dimensions of value according to Lean, is that it's fine to give you what you expect, but if it doesn't happen when you expect it, then this is also a problem. So we have to be able to measure speed, velocity, cycle time, customer lead time. These are new metrics which are coming to bear, which are equally as important to quality. And of course, as we see the world of open source and the world of the concept of highly competitive environments, we have to look at cost. Because one of the challenges we have today is that through history, legacy, and not dealing with technical debt, not removing complexity for our environment, generally our costs for IT operations are continuing to rise. And the average organization is currently running at an 80% run budget and continuing to rise because we don't consider and value investment in refactoring or reducing technical complexity and legacy debt. Our ability to innovate, our ability to be agile for new and net new customer value is decreasing. So as we see operational costs rise, our agility and capacity, innovation going down, these things are going in the wrong direction. When what we need now is better, faster, cheaper. So how do we deal with some of these questions, right? It's the 3 dimensions. We can't just deal with one, we have to have all 3. So this is why you're hearing such a dynamic change in the conversation. You see, all of this is being driven by a business problem, not an IT problem. Over the past few years, we have seen a dramatic increase in demand. The business demand has grown exponentially. And this is caused by what I like to call disruptive competition. Because what is true is that this evolution of cloud and the ability to stand up technology in a matter of basically minutes and days has changed the competitive environment. A traditional organization, if it wants to stand up a new platform with a new application, will take weeks, if not months, to do that. Now, when everything is code, a competitive organization has the ability to stand up a new business, leverage external cloud providers across the complete stack of the platforms, and have a complete business model up and running in a matter of days, if not weeks. beginning already to remove your customers and to compete with you in a disruptive way. How does a brick and mortar organization with all this complexity and legacy compete with an organization which can actually take its market share within 4 weeks of opening its doors? You see, this is the drive that the business is having to react to. This is the drive that is now forcing IT to think about speed and velocity, requirements to value. So as this grows, there's another problem. Our current environment, our current capabilities, our current processes, the variability, the fragmentation, the silo-based mentality has limited us as an IT organization on scaling to meet demand. So we have been able to keep up at a certain pace by giving up our nights and volunteering our weekends. So we've been able to compensate for a few years based on volunteering your extra time. But here's the thing. You can't invent new time. So now we have hit this plateau. We cannot keep up with demand. In fact, as we add more suppliers and we go more to cloud third party, our complexity isn't going down, it's going up. And we still haven't standardized on practices and or tools. This complexity is driving our ability to scale to meet demand in the wrong direction. At the same time, the business demand is going this way. Do you see the problem? This is the true driver behind all of this conversation that you're hearing around agile and digital transformation and go faster, better, faster, cheaper. It's a business problem. And unless we can actually address the challenges we see with current fragmentation, complexity, and technical debt, that risk gap will grow to such a point where they will have to find an alternative. Because there's a principle in lean. Demand will always flow. I want you to think about a dam, and the water is rising. The backlog of work is rising behind the dam. At some point, that water flows somewhere else. Now, in North America, we have this term because this term is reflective of what we're seeing as a trend in the industry. More and more, as organizations get into this challenge of supply and demand, and they're saying, we'd love to help you, but it's going to have to be in 4 weeks, 6 months. The business says, I just can't wait. If I don't move now, disruptive competition is going to completely put me in one of those brands that the gentleman had up on the wall earlier. Great brands that have fallen. So they have to find another way to get supply. They buy IT direct from cloud providers, or they fund their own environment. And this trend for what is called shadow IT, right, which is a negative name that internal IT has given to the business buying direct and not through them, I have another name for it, an economic name for it. Shadow IT is really loss of market share for internal IT. So again, this is the drivers that is changing what we're seeing in the industry. You see, if I was up here, and I was about 5 years ago, I would have talked to you about maturity, compliance, risk, robust process, availability. Remember those words? Those aren't the words we're using today. Because yes, we might have been a little bit extreme on the left side. Today what we're seeing is this shift to the right. Why? Because of this disruptive competition and this inability to meet demand with current supply. Now, left to some of our own devices, we have to be careful we don't go extreme right. Because if we go extreme right and go for complete speed and forget quality, then we're going to also be at risk in the concept of the warranty side, the non-functional requirements, the compliance, the audit, the regulatory. So we have to find a balance between the two. Yes, we can go faster, but we can't go and slip it to the other degree 100%. So how do we find the balance between speed and maturity? This is the question. So this is where we talk about agile service management. Many of you are worried, okay, what about this last 10 to 15 years I've invested in my ITIL framework? And is that all gone now that Agile and DevOps and Lean seem to be all the rage? You always hear the marketing and the webinar, well, ITIL is dead. That's a really funny statement because ITIL is simply the work we have always done to deliver services. So how can that be true? That isn't true. Let me describe to you why. The reality is if we're going to go faster, we have to combine these things. So Pink Elephant has coined the term agile, meaning quick, and also the ability to be flexible. Service management, the ability to deliver services, according to the 3 dimensions we talked about earlier. Quality, yes, but also speed and also cost. We have to think about all 3. Agile service management is, in essence, the combination of everything you see on that slide in an integrated system, which I'm now going to describe to you. All of this is better, faster, cheaper. Now note that I have said better, faster, cheaper. Sometimes you hear faster, better, cheaper, right? We're going to keep it on the better first. Quality, value is always going to be first and foremost. Now, just to give you a sense of how organizations are already rapidly adopting these frameworks, every year at Pink Elephant we do a survey for the conference that we hold annually in February, and we call this the think tank because what we're doing is we're dealing with current and controversial topics to understand what are the problems that you are dealing with. And so we gather together a number of people from different parts of the industry, but we also do a survey of the people at our conferences, which represent you, because they're the same type of folks with the same problems, with the same types of jobs. And we ask them the question, what is your current focus this year? What are you investing in? And we asked them the same question last year, by the way. And you can see what the answer was. What you see on the slide here is that Agile and DevOps and Lean represent at least 20-25% of what they're talking about, equal to their work on the ITIL framework. So they have given equal weighting in their investment and in their energy to these other emerging concepts and models, which I'm going to call acceleration models, which I'll describe to you now. So this is something that is totally now happening across the industry. So take a look now at how we now start to think about integrating these. What I'm describing to you here is a process architecture for understanding how to take demand and produce supply. You see, when I work with organizations, often they'll ask me, can you come and talk to us about these best practice frameworks? Can you describe and convince my senior leadership team why they need to adopt and adapt these models like ITIL, for example? And it's funny because I'll often go into this organization and there's a boardroom of very senior people, ladies and gentlemen, and they've got their arms crossed. Tell me why I should be interested in ITIL. And I say, okay, that's why I'm here. But let me ask you a few questions. Today, do you have processes where you engage with your customer, have conversations about requirements, where the organization is going in the future, and how IT can be a strategic advisor and partner? Of course we do. Well then, you capture those requirements and you develop some blueprint and you validate this requirement back to the conversation you had with your business, obviously. And then you take these requirements and you give them to a builder, a project manager, a developer. Yes. And then you test these requirements against, what you've built and what the customer said, obviously. And then you put this into production in such a way it doesn't take down everything else. Yes, that's what we do every day. And then, of course, you get to support what you do. What's your point? Congratulations, they're all doing ITIL right now. In fact, there is nothing in ITIL you currently aren't already doing. So it's not a question of if you're doing ITIL, it's what is it you're doing and how capable is it and how integrated is it. Because what I've described to you there is an enterprise value chain. Demand comes in the left and supply out the right. It's a supply chain. You see, we create value through orders. And it's not about being an order taker. We want to be an order taker because a service organization exists to serve based on receiving demand. But what kind of order? You want to be simply a transactional supplier who has no value add? Or do you want to be a strategic partner when every business process is digital? You are now the line. You are the manufacturing capability of all business process. There is no separation of business process in IT when IT is the underlying technology enabler for the entire business model. Now here's the problem. We don't structure ourselves or govern ourselves like a value system. We look individually at individual capabilities. So there's 3 levels at which organizations typically evolve in maturing service delivery. Before they ever see a picture like this, they say, we got to be good at something. I'm going to use the word capability. Okay, that's a general word, something I must be good at to deliver value. So I have to be good at architecture. I have to be good at project management. I have to be good at change management. I have to be good at support, incident management. Now, individual organizations, they begin thinking, well, I have to have these individual capabilities at a level of capability that delivers value. That's step 1. But what they don't understand is that those capabilities exist in a value system that have upstream and downstream inputs and outputs. So the second level of understanding they begin to emerge to is a value stream orientation. Oh, all right, this stuff up front feeds this stuff now downstream, and now design feeds build, and so we now begin to look at it as a horizontal value delivery. You see, the speed of your value delivery, because we're always talking about speed here, flow, this is a lean word, is about how fast work flows left to right. But if you don't look at your value system like a value system, how do you see the bottlenecks? Where do you see the buildup of work? Where do you see the constraints? You can't see what you can't see, right? This is a principle called jidoka that Lean gives us. To understand how to create fast flow in your organization, you have to understand it as a value stream and begin to look at where is flow being stopped because of poor capabilities. So the second level of maturity of managing in service delivery is an enterprise perspective of flow. The third and final level is when you understand that certain capabilities are, yes, at certain points in the model of delivery, but other capabilities underpin all of the model. On top, you have governance. On the bottom, continual improvement. But also, you have other capabilities which are underpinning the entire set of capabilities across the organization. Now, why is this important? Because, in my experience, in most organizations, enterprise anything is a myth. There is no enterprise governance. There is no enterprise continuous improvement. We govern by silo. We govern ops differently than we govern dev. And there is no shared belief, practice, or priorities within this system of value. Right? And there's no continual improvement that is horizontal. It's all vertical. This is a problem because delivery of value is horizontal. Now, I haven't put any frameworks up here. I'm just talking to you about the reality of how work happens in IT. Do you follow me? And we don't govern it as a value system. We govern it as if each individual capability exists in isolation. You can't get higher velocity that way. In fact, even if you do improve something in the overall system and it's not a bottleneck, you're not actually speeding up anything because you're doing localized improvement, which is not your pain point, on acceleration. So this concept of an enterprise flow that doesn't exist in most organizations is a critical evolution to understanding how do you accelerate velocity. We'll talk about DevOps tool chains in a minute. And the concept is there's a tool chain underlying this entire set of actions going from left to right, from requirements to value. What you can't govern is a tool that doesn't have a process, right? You have to have a process defined and its integration understood before you can understand how you speed up. This is a key point now as I unravel and explain to you how these frameworks now work. So what we've seen recently is this emergence of what I call the accelerators. Note on the bottom, we have this process architecture that exists, right? These people that I talked to earlier said they have all these processes. So whether they had ever heard the word ITIL or not, the processes exist for engage, plan, build, and run. This is the work we have always done. So Lean, as it's been adopted in IT, has been adopted, of course, for decades in other major verticals, starting with manufacturing and most recently in healthcare. Lean is basically behind all of these other models that you're seeing. It says if you're going to work at fast flow, you're going to have to do things like remove waste, reduce complexity, increase standardization. You're going to have to focus on measuring flow, not just quality. And you're going to have to work in smaller batches of work because that allows us to be more agile when we need to now consider, do I need to change direction? Because a big project will take 6 months and I won't be able to release the resources to do something else, even if something has changed 10 times in that 6 months. So release has to consider more smaller packages of work. After I finish that small batch called a sprint, I can then ask myself, hey, does it make sense for me to keep going, or do I go a different direction? So lean has always come to bear in an industry when they hit the problem that I mentioned earlier. Demand is greater than supply. And when that happens, an organization and industry begin to talk lean. Before that, why bother? So the lean conversation, though, this leaning out of increasing velocity, didn't hit IT all at the same time. In the 1990s, the software development world, which is further upstream in that engagement, right? They had this problem of a backlog growing and growing and growing. So they turned to lean, small batch called sprint, work in progress, limitation, visualization, using Kanban boards. They turned to lean to how to accelerate flow on the planned build. And it worked. They called it agile. You see, in IT, we have this thing, we like to name things after our own because we like to personalize it. What is agile? It's simply lean development. Almost everything behind the agile concepts were based on lean principles and practices. System thinking, velocity, flow. Okay? Agile comes along, and we create this faster flow on the front end of our value chain. Unfortunately, another thing happened, because lean says it's not good to only locally optimize. If you don't optimize the whole system, all you're going to do is shift your bottleneck further to the right. So this bottleneck shifts further to the right. Where does it end up? Right in front of move to production, change and release management. And so as bottlenecks grow, here's another thing that lean teaches us. As any work step becomes overburdened, overwhelmed, do you think it goes faster or slower? Slower. In fact, even what it does do creates more defect and causes more problems, creating more service disruption. So from the trenches of release management, this overwhelmed task came a cry, "This is insane, can't we work together?" And so DevOps was born as a response to Agile being too narrow in its scope in consideration of accelerated flow. And so now we consider the DevOps team not just including builders and developers, but also having participants from the operations environment and cross-functional requirements like security, compliance, and risk. Because now we're finally looking at accelerating the entire value chain, not just the planned build. So what I'm describing to you is that Lean, Agile, and DevOps are all accelerators to create faster flow. But here's the question. What are they accelerating? What you've always done. Service management. Processes for engagement, processes for plan, processes for build, processes for deliver. You can't accelerate nothing. Right? So this is what I want you to think about. These are accelerators, they're all connected, and Agile and DevOps are born from Mother Lean. And they have pulled forward a lot of the language and a lot of the concepts. So the whole thing is based on and predicated on we must go faster. These accelerators help you to do this. So, I am having trouble again, guys. I am pushing the same button. I want you to take this ITIL model that you traditionally know, right? All of these processes, come on. I am clicking. right? All of these processes that you have known so well in this wonderful circle that goes around and around, and I want you to look at them differently now. I want you to look at them. I'm going to have to ask you to click there. What you see now is ITIL in a value chain. We have processes for engage, strategic processes like business relationship management, tactical processes like catalog and request fulfillment, operational processes like service desk and incident management. This is your storefront. This is your front door. And all of these channels for engagement are pulling in demand at strategic, tactical, and operational levels that feed into strategy. And strategy then will, of course, feed into design, transition, and operations. And now we have ITIL in a flow. Now you can see where you work and where you live. But what's missing in this picture is the build piece, because we don't have software development or project management up here yet. We need to add that, so let me do that with you. Please go forward. So as I'm mentioning, it's not enough just to look at ITIL in a horizontal, in a value chain. We have to find ways to remove waste, to optimize flow, to get our ITIL processes back to first principles, because over time, any natural situation is that a process will gain more and more bureaucracy. In Lean, we talk about 3 types of work. There's value-added work, stuff that actually achieves or moves me closer to a goal. There's necessary but non-value work, stuff that is necessary to keep the whole process glued together. The governance, the parenting, the monitoring. And if I didn't have this governance for the process, we know the process would fall apart. And then there's complete waste. Why are we even doing that anymore? And so I have to look at a process in a different way. And so how can I maximize or optimize the stuff that adds value, but I'm going to minimize necessary non-value? Over time, as I mentioned, when process fails, we tend to add more control. This is where bureaucracy grows. The word bureaucracy, by the way, is not a negative word in its original design. It has become negative because people have associated it with too much necessary non-value. So when you lean out an ITIL process, you take it back to first principles, and you figure out what is just enough necessary non-value. We slim it down. And then we look for ways to slash areas of complete non-value. And by doing this, by looking at focusing on measuring flow with concepts like cycle time and lead time, which are end-to-end throughput measures, by removing the things which are not necessary, we gain velocity, yes, on one process, but what if we looked at the whole value stream now as a process? And look for bottlenecks, and look for waste, and look for ways to optimize the whole flow of value delivery, because we can see it that way. We can see it like a flow. We can see it like a system of value. We begin to create greater and greater velocity in how we take requirements and deliver them for value. But only if you see it like a value stream and not individual capabilities. You can do bad things by looking at an individual capability with good intent. Change management, for example. Change management is a process whose goal is to orchestrate flow into production in a smooth and less risk way. It's not designed, or was never intended to design, to be a process that stops flow and creates a barrier or firewall for production. But if you engineer your change management with that mindset, without understanding its true goal, is it going to add value to flow, or is it going to decrease flow? See, by creating a process in isolation, without its understanding of its part in the larger value system, we denigrate, we create disruption to value creation. We still need change management, but we have to find a way to move more changes to lower risk and less changes that have manual requirements for authorization. Agile and DevOps give us some of those tools to lower risk. So let's keep going. I mentioned earlier a key principle of Lean is to understand what you're dealing with, to make the invisible visible. This is the principle of Jidoka. You cannot govern what you cannot see. So you have to make work visible. And where work is has to be understood. What it can't be is in someone's inbox or email account. You can't see that, right? You can't see when it's in someone's queue in a service management tool and you don't understand the flow of where work is or where that work package currently sits within the status of completion. We have to bring work out of the invisible inboxes of your email and create a visibility that shows us work in a visual way. So this is a Kanban. It's a lean visual management tool that has been brought into Agile and also now DevOps. And so, an interesting perspective. One, we have to manage work, because if we keep too much work in the air and have too many things going at one time, we suffer a consequence lean calls switching cost. Every time you move from work to work to work, you're going to have to pay a price in loss of productivity because we lose momentum as we move between too many pieces of work. Research show that human beings can only optimally hold 3 in-flight or in-progress pieces of work without losing and decreasing productivity. So it's faster to have just maximum 3 things on the go, complete those 3 things, and then pull the next 3 things, than try to keep 10 things in the air all going at the same time. But you can't control that unless you can create a Kanban board or system that controls and limits the current work in progress. The other thing that we need to understand is that our projects, our service delivery, they all use the same resources. We operate under this myth that everyone has unlimited capacity. It's a myth. What we have to be able to see, what you see on this diagram, is different types of work being done by those resources, and what type of work is planned and what is unplanned, and what is my current capacity, and how is it being eroded by unplanned work. I do many different discussions and research with organizations, and here's what I've discovered. They tell me, I don't tell them this, they discover through analysis that 80% of their given capacity on any given week is spent on unplanned, not planned work. That's amazing. But you can't see that until you see that. You cannot govern what is invisible. The lean concept of visual management. So what I'm describing to you is that you use lean concepts which are agnostic of any specific framework but apply to any process to increase velocity and flow, not just on one process, but on the entire value system as you treat it as a process, a big process, a macro process. Now let's keep going. This world of Agile. So to be Agile is good because the Agile concept says I'm quick, I'm nimble, I'm able to change direction when things change. And we know we live in a world where every day things change. What was true yesterday is no longer true today. What was important last week is no longer the most important thing this week. So we can't be locked into fixed work patterns that take major chunks of time and resources without constantly asking, is this the right thing to be doing, or should we be doing something else? Does the business need to shift? So being agile is positive. However, there's a downside to agility. I want you to think about that value system you saw earlier, the engage, plan, build, run concept, okay? Another truth that lean and agile gives us is that for the system to be fast as a system, each part of the system have to share common belief, practice, and priorities. If different parts of the system, people in plan, people in build, people in run, are all being agile in different directions without shared belief, practice, and priority, what happens to flow? That's what's happening now. Many organizations are actually decrementally or negatively impacting their overall velocity because they're localized in their agility, and there is no perception of systems velocity. The word velocity, by definition, is speed with direction. If we are in a horizontal value chain, all of the agents of that chain have to be working according to a common purpose instead of beliefs and practices, using common tools. Otherwise, we're all being agile and we're killing flow. But are we managing this as a system, or are we managing it as individual capabilities which somehow mythically are in isolation? In my experience, most organizations are trying to improve capabilities as isolated areas of improvement, not understanding this system context. So this agility thing is great, but let's explore it a little bit more, right? Being the agile enterprise, please continue. This is no longer working. Next slide. We're moving towards this world of agile project management. It began as a software development method. But as I mentioned earlier, what's happening is it's now moving into other parts of the organization, even into non-IT functions. Because what is true is that people are realizing that there are certain things about Agile which have more alignment with how people think and how we currently work. One of the interesting things about traditional project management, it was based on assumptions that even the developers of project management argued were actually flawed in their initial assumption, but it was the best thing they had to go, so they developed something. And that initial assumption that was flawed is that when we talk to a customer and we're engaging them with requirements discussion, that they can conceive of and define upfront all of their requirements and their specifications for something they haven't yet ever seen. And we force them to do this. Let's make sure we get all of the specifications, all the requirements, because I cannot guarantee you a fixed budget and or timeline until you tell me everything this thing must do, even though you've never seen one. Interesting perspective. Why are we driving that conversation? Largely to protect the project manager so that he or she can promise an on-time, on-budget thing. But it's forcing a hypothesis or an assumption which is not feasible. We cannot upfront define all requirements for something we've never seen. So what Agile says is, let's not try to do that. Let's just try to define enough requirements for the first minimum viable prototype. It doesn't have to be the thing we end up with, but let's play with an idea. Let's build out a wireframe, a rough concept, but it's a minimum viable kind of complete thing to look at. And so we do that. And then, we do a review, because every Agile sprint has 2 mandatory actions. And these are wonderful. You must review with a client what they see and get feedback from them. This is called a feedback loop. Every 4 weeks, at maximum, you have to have an engagement with your customer. Does this make sense? Is this what you want? Does this seem like something you would appreciate? Guess what's going to happen the moment you show them a prototype? Eureka! I have 5 new ideas. But in classic project management, we say, no. We'll get to your ideas when we finish the first set you've given us. Right? So in classic project management, we don't accept scope creep as positive. In Agile, we accept scope is normal to change. And we just put it into the backlog, which is constantly prioritized based on what? Based on the customer's perspective of the highest value work versus lowest value work. So we're always focused on the higher value work above and beyond the lower. So a waterfall process is trying to bring the whole big thing across the line. Imagining if we could somehow to define all requirements up front without understanding this changes. An Agile method says, let's just do the first piece. Let's do the next piece. Let's do the next piece. Now here's the other thing about Agile. You can see we're breaking it down into smaller pieces. That lowers risk. That allows me to make changes more rapidly because they're less risky changes. And if I lower the complexity and I make it smaller, I can see defects easier. And if I see them earlier, I can recover from them cheaper. Because the longer you go without having some kind of validation, right, with feedback and or testing, the more difficult it is to see defect, and the more costly it is to back out of it. So we're going to speed up, create higher value, and reduce the rate of defects being introduced to production. See, this agile thing, it works the way people work. Because if you show me something, I guarantee you, I'm going to have 5 new ideas. The classic project management linear model is based on assumptions that even the founders of those models agreed weren't very logical, but it was something. It was better than nothing. And if we spend too much time working on features or requirements that no longer make sense, Lean would call that waste. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that let's say I do a sprint. I do a piece of work. Now, over the week, something has happened in the news. Something competitive has happened that has drastically changed our business plan. What I'm able to do in an agile concept is once I finish that sprint, I have a meeting with my customer. It's called a feedback loop. I have another meeting as well, by the way, with my sprint team to see how do I go faster next time. That's a retrospective. But this meeting with the customer says, do I keep going? Or do I change and now reapply my resources to something else? So every 4 weeks, maximum, I constantly ask, is this the right place to be spending my resources and energy? Or do I need to, by agile means, go a different direction? Because the business needs me to reapply resources somewhere else. This is the principle of agility. Flexibly giving our resources to the most effective areas at the most important times. And that's breaking work down into smaller packages of work, and at the end asking, do I keep going or do I go somewhere else? Business driven, business feedback loop is what is key here. So, how does this fit in now? So I want you to look at this value chain I had up earlier, right? I've got this engage to run value system. How you do work, how you take requirements and deliver value. What ITIL didn't do, and what neither Agile or PMI do well, is describe how does it fit. It fits right in the middle. It's the engine room of your value delivery creation. Now, it's fitting in the room because on the left I hear demand. All that demand goes up to strategy. Strategy says, here are the major themes, the major epics, the major things the organization needs to achieve. That feeds the build practice, right? Right into that agile spot, or classic project management. It doesn't matter. That's where project management fits. Now, left to its own devices, the development team would focus on feature, because that's what they're hearing from the customer, the voice of customer. What we also have to fit in is the design requirements that are non-functional. So ITIL's service design area feeds in to the work breakdown package, the user stories, not just feature requirements, but requirements for architecture, requirements for supplier management, requirements for disaster recovery and service continuity, requirements for security. Because we must, to deliver value, get both feature and non-feature work done. This is how it fits. It's like a conveyor belt moving it along, and it goes into this model. So this DevOps world now. The DevOps world talks about principles and practices. The things that we often hear, what you see here, it's called comms. I'm not going to go into detail because many of these things I've already talked about. We have a culture of collaboration, not isolation. I measure end-to-end throughput. I look at processes in a lean value system orientation. I focus on knowledge sharing. What people don't realize is what is DevOps. Now, DevOps is not a framework. It doesn't have a book. There are several books out there, and there's some good ones like the Phoenix Project and now the handbook, the DevOps handbook. But remember, DevOps is not a framework, it's a movement. And the movement started in release management. But it has grown over time, and it will keep growing. Currently, these are the practices of DevOps. All of these things are part of the community of conversation. Some of them we've already talked about. We have to accelerate the work you've always done. Service management. right? We have to look at lean and look at flow and look at velocity. We have to work in more smaller packages in an agile way to be more dynamic in how we apply resources. We have to think about bottlenecks. Where is the bottleneck in my total world? That's called the theory of constraints. And how do I remove bottlenecks to find balance for demand and supply? I have to think about now some new things. This is where DevOps is getting into new areas. How do I get into continuous integration? Every day I'm making changes. I have to make sure that I have multiple teams working off the same code base, and the thing that they have to do every day is make sure they put their changes into the shared code base. It's called the trunk, because I have to make sure that the next change is applied to the most up-to-date environment. See, I'm a nerd as well. I like playing with technology. I manage Linux boxes, home servers. The first thing I ever do before I upgrade or apply a new change is I update my current packages. And then I apply my change, because I want to always make sure that I'm applying the most recent. Where we're getting into now, though, and what I'm going to finish off with here, is what we call the continuous delivery pipeline. So it's one thing to make sure we have good practice around continuous integration. And by the way, that's not too new. Those of you who knew ITIL version 2, remember software configuration management? We do good artifact management, good versioning control. We have an ability to roll back to a steady state. By the way, these provisioning and configuration management tools allow us to adapt very quickly to disruption. If you have a good steady state image captured, you can recover that total environment, especially if it's totally virtual, not just software, hardware, but network. I can recover an entire environment within a matter of minutes. I do this all the time. I'm playing with my Linux box. I make a massive mistake. I don't try to triage it and fix what I made a mistake. I just roll back to my previous steady state, 3 minutes. There's advancements now happening because of this whole Internet of Everything, and basically code is everything. Many organizations are creating what are called blue-green environments. All this is totally duplicated virtual environments for production. Not just software, the whole stack. Software, hardware, OS, network. And they have a toggle switch between them. At one point, at any point, only one is live. I make my changes and test my changes in production, but in the non-live version of it. If it doesn't blow up and it works successfully, all I do is flip the toggle switch. Next set of changes, the other one. And I go back and forth. At any point, if I make a disruptive change that, of course, fails in production, what do? Pop it back. Matter of less than a minute to recover. Most organizations don't even realize they had an incident. You see, this whole concept of everything is code is changing everything. And this is what's enabling disruptive technology. And so this continuous delivery pipeline is predicated on this virtual concept. And the thing about the pipeline, though, the last thing I want to leave you with, it's not just individual point solutions, right? So we have this automated testing and deployment pipeline. But so here we have this wonderful new fun world of continuous delivery and building a pipeline of automation that takes all of the various tasks from requirements to value and flows them, again, left to right. I want you to conceive of this as the underlying conveyor belt of technology that underpins the entire plan, build, run structure. Now, before we get too excited, there are some things we have to agree. Before I can automate anything, I have to agree there's one way to do something. There's one way to do configuration management for software. There's one way to do provisioning of hardware. There's one way to do deployment of software. So I have to get you to agree on standardization of process. That's an interesting people problem. And then once I agree there's one way to do something, I have to make sure it's the most optimum way to do it. I look at leaning it out, optimizing the process, minimizing disruption of necessary non-value, and removing waste. Now I can automate it. Before I can automate it, I have to standardize it. That's an organizational change challenge before it's ever a tool challenge. Now, one last thing. So today we have these things in point solutions. Let's say we standardize each one of these elements in the value creation, and we're picking the fun new open source models that we see up here to do this stuff. It's one thing to standardize on an individual capability, but now I have to tie them together because one will input to the other in an integrated flow, not just automated test. So what I'm doing here is not just standardizing on technologies for the various stages of my value stream. I'm integrating those technologies, and now this is called a pipeline, a continuous delivery pipeline. How does it fit? It fits like this. Under the whole model, I have this enabling capability of technology. Remember what I said earlier. There are 3 stages of maturity of an organizational delivery capability. I first believe and focus on individual things. I then look at it and understand that it's not individual things, it's in a value chain. And the third one is when I understand there are underlying capabilities which underpin all of the value chain. This pipeline is one of those. And so what you're seeing here, by leveraging ITIL and Agile and Lean and automated continuous delivery, is we're creating a value system that has one goal. How do I move requirements to value in the fastest way possible? But I have to manage it as a system, because I can't see what I can't see unless you see it as a system. These things work together. Do you follow? Do you see? This is the picture on the puzzle box. You had all the pieces. This is how the puzzle comes together and how the pieces fit. So if you find this interesting, Pink Elephant has developed a lot of content around these concepts. And one of the things that we do is that George Spalding and I, who's an executive vice president at Pink Elephant, we have this podcast called Practitioner Radio. And you can find this podcast on our blogs, and you can see that we're doing a lot of this kind of conversation. So if you found this an interesting discussion, I have specific podcasts and webinars on this topic that you can link to and you can share with your colleagues in your organization. So has this been helpful, folks? Do you see the big picture? Do you see how your investment in ITIL doesn't go away? Because you can't accelerate nothing. You have to accelerate everything you've always done. You can't say, oh, DevOps is here, ITIL is no longer needed. If you're saying that, you don't understand the value system, how services are created and how they're delivered and how they're improved. Not individual capabilities, but a connected system of value delivery. Thank you very much.